I can only speak for myself, but paying it forward, it makes me feel good, especially this time of year. And that's kind of how I think of supporting Boise State Public Radio podcasts, paying it forward. That's because we don't require any money in order to listen to our podcast. You don't have to pay a fee to hear a locked episode. You don't have to subscribe to a feed in order to hear the podcast. You can listen and share to your heart's content free of charge. But it does cost money to make these things. And if you're able to pay it forward, between now and the end of the year, we would greatly appreciate your support. If you feel so inclined, if you feel so inspired, please go to boisestatepublicradio.org right now and click that blue donate button. Any amount, any frequency, it all helps the bottom line here at Boise State Public Radio. Thanks in advance for your support. And of course, thanks for listening.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. It's Friday, which means it's time for our Reporter Roundtable. This is, of course, when we get you updated on all the news that made headlines this last week. And today, we are starting our conversation with Troy Oppie, All Things Considered host with Boise State Public Radio News. A lot to get to this week. Troy, welcome.
Hi, Gemma. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. So let's start with taking a look at the failed Albertsons-Kroger merger. This was a multi-million-dollar deal. It's been trying to happen for the last 2 years. However, this week, 2 different judges in 2 different states blocked this deal from going through. So I want to go all the way back to the beginning of this, Troy, back to October of 2022, when these 2 grocery giants proposed to merge, with Kroger agreeing to buy Albertsons. So let's start there. What was the price tag on that initial deal?
It was $24.6 billion. And basically, Kroger said, we'll buy up Albertsons stock for more than $33 a share, which was about a 33% increase of the share price in that moment. And they also, Albertsons also said at the time that they would issue a special dividend of nearly $7 a share. That dividend was fought unsuccessfully in court and paid out in early 2023, with that price set to be reflected in what Kroger was offering to buy up Albertsons.
Okay, so Troy, this has not been smooth sailing for these 2 grocery chains.
No.
This is, from the very beginning, right? There was a lot of pushback. So can we talk about this? Because the part of the pushback was, if this goes through, this is a monopoly.
Well, yeah, there were antitrust concerns from the very beginning, and some of this we knew, right? There are not far from where I live in Boise, there's an Albertsons on one corner and a Fred Meyer on the other. Those 2 stores are owned by the 2 different companies. And this was happening in many different markets in the Northwest, in the Midwest as well, where there's that crossover. And Albertsons and Kroger argued aggressively that they needed to merge, which would have created a company of about 5,000, 6,000 store locations across the country in order to compete with larger operations like Walmart and Costco, Amazon, Target to a certain extent. And they said, we need to do this or we're going to be in trouble. And what the antitrust regulators argued back was that, well, no, you aren't in the same ballpark as them. You are supermarkets. You are more local and smaller. And that was a big part of these 2 court rulings, one issued in federal court in the District of Oregon and the other issued in Washington State Superior Court this week, that sided with the FTC and the other entities that sued to stop this merger. They said, no, supermarkets are supermarkets, and we're not going to say that you are on the same playing field as some of these larger companies.
So before we get to what happened in court this week, Troy, I do want to talk a little bit more about Kroger and Albertsons responding to a lot of these concerns over the last 2 years, because this is where I get confused. Didn't they agree to divest of certain stores in markets where both grocery companies had stores? Because I know that there was a list that came out a while back just for the Treasure Valley. And in fact, I live right between 2 big Albertson stores, and one of them would have been sold off in this divestiture.
Right, they did. And in fact, it happened in several stages. There was an initial announcement that Kroger would complete the merger with Albertsons and immediately spin off more than 400 stores to a third party in order to appease regulators, where in places where this crossover is, in order to maintain separate competition at the supermarket level in these different markets. That number was increased ultimately to 579 stores for just shy of $3 billion as part of the deal. And the company that they lined up to buy it was primarily a grocery distributor called C&S Wholesale Grocers. They do operate several dozen grocery supermarkets, most notably under the Piggly Wiggly brand banner in a different part of the country. But the judge's rulings in both cases looked at C&S very dimly, that C&S doesn't have a great history as a retail grocery operator. They've bought hundreds of stores in the past 20 years, and they own very few of those stores since. They have been sold off or liquidated, and the courts took a pretty dim view of this setup with C&S as an answer to that question of continued supermarket competition in markets where Albertsons and Kroger have significant crossover.
And the Federal Trade Commission, Troy, basically opposed this plan from the beginning. I mean, not only saying that it would create a monopoly, but they also said they were concerned that this would allow this merger to raise grocery prices, because we should note that this would have been the largest grocery store merger in U.S. history. So what in the world did Kroger and Albertsons even try to argue when it came to the fact that they would have the ability to raise grocery prices?
Well, they argued that the merger was going to create efficiencies and essentially economy of scale that would allow them to bring prices down and pay their employees better. Kroger announced that it would undertake a $1 billion effort to reduce grocery prices and essentially give back to consumers. An interesting note from the case ruling in Washington State Superior Court, which was issued this week by Marshall Ferguson, Judge Marshall Ferguson. I thought it was interesting that he said, look, I don't see anything in this argument that indicates where Kroger is going to be able to find these types of savings in efficiencies. And they've made a promise, that's fine, but a promise isn't a guarantee. And he really dismissed that argument from Kroger, saying that, maybe you can do this great, but I just don't see it. And so that promise of lower prices really, in the eyes of the court, wasn't anything that could be relied on.
Okay, so you've mentioned these court cases, Troy. How did lawsuits come about? How did this land in court? And we should say, not just in one court, but two courts in two separate states.
Actually, three. So the Federal Trade Commission, 8 different states' attorneys general, and the attorney general in the District of Columbia were one case. That was the case that was in federal court in the District of Oregon. There were separate cases brought by the states of Washington and Colorado. There was no ruling issued in the Colorado case, and now because Albertsons has called off the merger officially, that would be moot.
Okay. So on Tuesday, both of these judges ruled. I'm assuming that was kind of a coincidence, right? I mean, they weren't necessarily.
Judge Marshall. Yeah, the judge in Washington State kind of hinted at that during his ruling hearing, saying, as I understand, the federal court has also ruled in this case today, and by circumstance, here we are as well. I wasn't sure. I was kind of anticipating that the rulings might all come out at once. Whether or not that was coordinated, I wasn't entirely sure of. But yeah, we ended up with 2 on the same day, and again, the third being moot.
And ultimately, both of these judges ruled that the merger could not go through, correct?
Correct. Yeah, they sided with regulators in this definition of what is a supermarket and who Albertsons and Kroger should be compared to, and they took that dim view of the divestiture plan with C&S that really seemed to be the linchpin to torpedo the deal.
Okay, and so then within hours of these decisions coming out, Troy, Albertsons, not only did they call the merger off,
Mhm.
Albertsons is now suing Kroger for breach of contract. So explain all of this for us.
Yeah, basically, Albertsons is now saying Kroger was not cooperating with us. They were not accepting the advice of regulators. They were unwilling to do what needed to be done to get this deal approved by regulators and satisfy those competitive arguments. And they didn't do enough. And by failing to accommodate, to do everything in their power that they could to get this merger to go through, Albertsons alleges that Kroger breached their initial contract. There's a $600 million termination fine that Albertsons thinks it can collect, and they want to sue. In their press release, they said, we want to sue for billions of dollars in damages. Kroger, in turn, has said, no, we did what we needed to do. These are not appropriate allegations, and we're going to fight them in court. So they're going to end up, what Albertsons did is basically, look, they think they have a better option going back to court to sue Kroger for breach of contract than they did to appeal this ruling by the federal district judge in Oregon.
Okay, so next steps then is we now have another lawsuit. They will probably land back in court. But what about Albertsons putting itself back up for sale? Do we know if something like that would even happen?
We don't, and I think it's fair to say that the majority owner of Albertsons Service Capital Management is, they're an investment fund, and they're not necessarily in the grocery business. I wouldn't expect them to want to hold on to Albertsons long term, but they have also said in a statement that they have no plans to sell. Both Albertsons and Kroger, despite arguing, on Albertsons' side, they argued during court proceedings that this merger not going through would put the company at risk of having to close stores and lay off employees, and it could be very problematic. Well, when they called off the merger, Albertsons in its statement said, the financial outlook of the company is strong. They bumped up their upcoming dividend by 3 cents, which is 25% of what it was, and they said, we're going to embark on a $2 billion stock buyback plan over the next little while. Kroger, on its end, was already planning to buy back about $1 billion in stock, and they bumped that number up to $7.5 billion in a stock buyback plan. So they're trying to reward shareholders despite this deal not going through, and both companies say, we're fine, we're moving on, and this is what it's going to be.
Okay. Well, with that said, Troy, I want to switch gears now and have you put a sports hat on for a minute, because let's talk Bronco. I know.
Pivot.
Okay, pivot. We are going to talk Bronco football because it's a lot going on, as people know, with the college football playoffs. But I want to talk specifically about Ashton Jeanty. He picked up a really big award last night. This is called the Marshall Award. And I will be completely honest, I had not heard about this award until Jeanty won it last night. So tell us what it is.
Well, it's a big deal. In fact, and I'm sorry, Jim, I'll correct you. It's the Maxwell Award. It is
Maxwell.
the Player of the Year Award.
See? I'm wrong.
The Maxwell Trophy is what it is. It's one of several outstanding player awards that are awarded. Jeanty was given 2 National College Football Awards yesterday. He also won the Doak Walker Award as the nation's premier running back. And this is a big deal. He instantly becomes the most honored player in Boise State history with those 2 awards, and is up for the Heisman Trophy on Saturday in a vote that I think is going to be very, very close. There are other National Player of the Year awards that are voted on. The Walter Camp Player of the Year award is one that was presented last night to Travis Hunter. Ashton Jeanty was in the running for that as well. Colorado's wide receiver, defensive back, two-way player Travis Hunter is the odds-on favorite for the Heisman, but I do think this vote on Saturday is going to end up being quite close. And maybe Jeanty comes out on top, maybe he doesn't, but I think he's top 2, certainly in the Heisman conversation there. But in terms of just the prestige of the Maxwell Award, the Doak Walker Award. The last time a non-power conference player won the Maxwell Award was BYU's Ty Detmer in 1990.
Oh, wow.
To give you an idea of how prestigious this is.
So the Maxwell Award, if I'm understanding this right, Troy, it's presented every year to a college football player. And the folks behind this who give this out, this is a panel of like sportscasters, sports writers, but the National Collegiate Athletic Association, their head coaches, and then members of the Maxwell Football Club. And this award says, basically, you are the best college football player in the United States.
Most outstanding is the official phrase that they use. Most outstanding college football player, and it's interesting. I think if Bronco fans were watching the Mountain West Conference Championship game, Brock Heward, the analyst on that telecast, was saying, I think if the Heisman, and I don't mean to keep pivoting back to the Heisman conversation, but I will. Heward said if the Heisman was voted on by only college coaches, Ashton Jeanty would be the guy. And I think that resonated with a lot of people. But also, that's what the Walter Camp Award is. It is only coaches and sports information directors. And that group gave the Walter Camp Award to Travis Hunter of Colorado. You take those same coaches, sports information directors, you add in hundreds of members of the media and the Maxwell Club staff and members, you get this bigger pool of voters. Well, they gave their award to Ashton Jeanty. So this is another one of the reasons why I think this Heisman Trophy vote on Saturday is going to end up very, very close.
So has there ever been a BSU Bronco football player who has been a finalist for the Heisman?
Oh, yes. Kellen Moore was a finalist as a junior. Coincidentally, Ashton Jeanty also a junior. And Kellen Moore was a long shot to win that award, admittedly, but he did get to go to New York. He was the first player ever in Boise State football history to be a Heisman finalist. Interestingly enough, he was left out of that finalist conversation as a senior the following year in 2011.
So Ashton Jeanty will go back to New York for this Saturday's Heisman Trophy award ceremony. So his main rival is this player from Colorado, right, Troy? I mean, it's really, would you say, down to these two players?
Correct. Yeah, there are two other finalists that'll be there or that are there in New York, and that's Miami quarterback Cam Ward and Dylan Gabriel, who's the Oregon quarterback. Those guys are finalists, but the race is really between Jeanty and Travis Hunter. Hunter last night won the Bednarik Award as the country's top defensive player. He won the Bolitnikoff Award as the country's top wide receiver. He won that Walter Camp Award. He's also been named the Associated Press Player of the Year, and as I said, is the odds-on favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. We'll have to see. But that ceremony is 6 o'clock Mountain Time on Saturday night. Jeanty is there. He met with media in a Zoom call last night that I was on, and he said he was looking forward to the experience. He's excited to be dressing up, get the chance to go back and eat out in New York, which he's familiar with because he has family there and he loves the food, and he's just... He just wants to soak it all up before he's got to get back on the practice field as Boise State prepares for the Fiesta Bowl.
Well, very quickly before I let you go, if you had to bet on this, is Jeanty bringing home the Heisman?
Well, I'm not betting the rent money.
Okay. Okay.
I think I'm in line with odds makers. I think it's not fair to just call it hype around Travis Hunter. He is an electric player. If you think of this award as an MVP, a most valuable player, I think Jeanty gets it because Boise State is not having the same success this year without him. Whereas Colorado, maybe finishes around the same. But in terms of just pure electricity, Travis Hunter is a phenomenal player. And so I think he'll probably get the nod. But again, I'm betting this is going to be a very close vote.
Well, I have to say it's exciting to watch all of this unfold for the entire Bronco football team, but in particular for Ashton Jeanty. But as always, Troy, really appreciate you coming on and breaking all of this down for us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll have more with our Reporter Roundtable right after this. And continuing our Friday Reporter Roundtable with Sydney Kidd, a reporter with Boise Dev, and Mia Maldonado, state politics reporter at the Idaho Capital Sun. And Sydney, I want to start with some pretty big news out of downtown Boise in regards to a popular street. It looks like a part of 8th Street is going to be permanently closed to motor vehicles. So, which part of 8th Street are we talking about?
Yeah, so this part would be between Main and Bannock Streets. So this has been a project that has actually been in the works for quite a few years now. They decided about in 2022 to make the change to pedestrian only permanent, and they've just been working out the details since then. So this is going to be the area that everyone's familiar with. It's got Fork, it's got Zeppeli, it's got Red Feather. It's that restaurant row part of downtown.
Mhm. And Sydney, you mentioned that in 2022, the city made this a permanent pedestrian closure. But this kind of all stemmed from the fact that when COVID hit, the city closed the street pretty quickly so that restaurants could have a seating space outside and basically stay open. And this proved to be incredibly popular. So with that said, on Tuesday, the city council approved the plan for a design space. So can you talk a little bit more about this and what that new design will look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's going to be instead of having, as you know, right now there's curbs,
Mhm.
and then the main street area. They're going to eliminate the curbs and just make it all flat to allow for some accessibility. And then, in addition to having just an area for people to wander about and kind of move wherever they want, they'll also have a portion of the street that will be dedicated to just some streamlined transportation of pedestrians that just want to walk straight through. They said that this would help with people who are vision impaired, so that they don't have to worry about having people just like randomly walk in front of them or move unpredictably. Um, and then there's also plans to have a sort of gathering space in the middle. Um, and then in order to do all that they're wanting to do, the patio spaces for the restaurants will become smaller than they have
Mhm.
been, but they will still be larger than those patio spaces were before COVID, before this became a permanent pedestrian zone.
And Sydney, I was reading the Boise Dev article on this, and the one thing that struck me as well is they talked about this when they do kind of this re-envision of this space, that it can even become an event space.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it
There's
really is.
right? So and that's really been worked into these plan designs. They want to have more trees in the area, but they want to put them on planters that can be moved around so that they can sort of, create whatever spaces they need to create for this area. It's pretty interesting because it's right in the middle of downtown. It's Boise's first pedestrian only part of the downtown. And now to add event spaces on, it's pretty interesting.
So, so we should know too that the only reason why the city can do this, it's basically one of the only streets the city actually controls that 88 that the 80 County Highway District does not control. Hence, why the city can make these changes. But with that said, when is construction going to begin on this? Because because since they're taking the curbs out and all of that, I mean, it's a fairly significant project.
Right. So the plans to start the construction, according to Margaret Carmel, who actually did the reporting on this, it would be March of 2026.
With the
And
goal.
it's supposed to be completed before the height of the patio dining season later that year.
Well, I have to say, I'm excited for this just on a personal level. I think it will just be it'll aesthetically look so good. And since it's already closed, it's great to see this process moving forward. So appreciate that report on that, Sydney. Mia, some news coming from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council in regards to salmon and steelhead numbers they apparently haven't reached their goal because they wanted to return a really large amount of these fish to the Columbia River Basin. Can you talk about that?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Gemma. So the Northwest Power Conservation Council is a group that was established by Congress in 1980 and it authorized states like Idaho, Montana, Washington, and Oregon to develop a program to protect fish impacted by hydropower in the Columbia River Basin. And yeah, in 1987, that council set a goal to have 5 million salmon and steelhead returned to the basin past Bonneville Dam by 2025. It's 2024, and in a meeting on Tuesday with the council, we learned that we are nowhere close to that. The closest the council has been to reaching that 5 million fish goal was in 2014 when 4.6 million salmon and steelhead returned to the basin. But since then, it's really stagnated each year between 0.5 million and 2 million fish returning to the basin for the last 10 years. So this number, it's, small in comparison to what historic runs were before dams were built in the basin. Salmon and steelhead runs were between 10 to 16 million each year.
Okay, but Mia, I read your article and officials say there's a positive trend in all of this, though. So can you tell us what they mean by that?
Yes, so there is some good news. So while we're not near our goal of reaching $5 million fish back in the basin, officials say they are seeing progress, especially in comparison to the 1990s when runs in the basin went as far as below 1 million a year. So data presented Tuesday with the council showed that the 10-year rolling average, so between 2014 and 2023, that average stands at 2.3 million salmon and steelhead returning to the basin, which is similar to the previous average between 2004 and 2013, which was 2.4 million fish. So these numbers in the 2 millions, even though we're not near 5 million, it's way better than our 10-year average in the 90s, which fell to 1.3 million fish. So it is progress, and that's what officials are saying. That's what, we're not quite there at our goal, but there is progress, especially after key points, especially after 1980, when the Northwest Power Conservation Council was established and started setting these goals. And also since the 1990s, when 12 species of salmon and steelhead were protected under the Endangered Species Act. So whenever you envision a line graph, there is an upward trend since those key policies that focused on bringing salmon and steelhead populations were established. And all of those efforts, it's been a collective effort from federal agencies, state agencies, and especially tribes who have really helped manage hatcheries above Bonneville Dam and bring back fish populations upstream.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much for your reporting. And I want to thank all of our panelists today for our Friday Reporter Roundtable. They were Sydney Kidd, reporter with BoiseDev.com, Mia Maldonado, states politics reporter at the Idaho Capital Sun, and our very own All Things Considered host, Troy Oppie. I'm Gemma Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters.
We could all use a little help navigating the news these days. The Consider This podcast wants to give you a hand. 6 days a week, we'll help you make sense of the day's biggest news story and what it means for you in less than 15 minutes. Listen now to the Consider This podcast from NPR.